you're excused.
Hello, this is our second episode of our Creatively Unworthy Podcast. I'm Rebecca, and this is
Larry Chambers.
Yeah.
Hi.
And today we're going to talk about, Larry's going to introduce the topic.
We're going to talk about convergent and divergent thinking. This is a takeoff of last time we talked about hunter-farmer, and you'll see the connection as I get into it. But I've always believed that success leaves clues, and I found this book written by a Cambridge professor by the name of Leon Houston. He wrote this back in the 60s. And basically what he did for his PhD was he went around to all of these schools in England and he interviewed all of these kids that had passed, the high test to get into Cambridge, I guess it was. And he wanted to find out just a whole series of questions about them. But as he was doing all of this, he found that there was another group. He called this group of people that got in, the kids that got in, they were mostly boys, science, science thought, they were good in math, good in science, like that. And then there was another group that couldn't pass these tests, and he called them the creatives. They were creative thinkers. And what he found is in his study was that the higher the scores, or the smarter the kids were to get in, the less creative they were, and the lower the scores, the more creative. And what he called them was convergent and divergent thinkers. And what that means is convergent thinkers means converging to a single correct answer. Divergent is all over the place. So this fits in with our discussion about being ADD and dyslexic, both of us are, our discussion about hunters and farmers.
I really like that. It reminds, that's perfect.
It reminds you of what you're going to say.
Yeah,
We have this one problem because we're not, by the way, we're not trained scientists,
or psychologists or anything, or
we're ADD and dyslexic. We do interrupt each other. Okay.
Yeah. And I don't know, I'm kind of nervous, but also my thoughts are all over the place, and I'm trying to.
Well, good. We'll get them convergently thinking.
Yeah.
But here was his point.
My folks watched their podcast last time, and they said that another good example would be, what's it called? For hunter farmer would be like hunter gatherer. No. And I like, gather is in like gathering, kind of mindlessly repetitive, but that reminds me of totally of the hunter farmer kind of.
Yeah, hunter gatherer. See, that's what farmers do to politely not say farmer. But we're not being polite in this because we're talking about farmer thinking. We're not really. Gather thinking is still hunting. Hunters and gatherers are hunters. But somewhere around the last ice age, what the theory is that the earth started to warm up. And before that, we were all hunters. Everybody had the hunter gene. We were all hunters. And if you were lousy hunters, you didn't feed your family, you didn't eat, you stayed back in camp. And the best hunters fed their family. Okay, suddenly the ice age melts. The earth really it was a complete shift in our climate. And suddenly all of those, the hunter-gatherer that weren't that good at hunting, that stayed back eating horse hoofs and, leftovers, suddenly were growing plants. And suddenly, because they were stable, their families grew, their communities grew, their countries grew, and the hunters died out. And you can almost trace that. We're not going to get into the historic thing about it, but it really makes sense.
No, that's a really awesome way to say that. I feel like last time we talked more about how it related to us and how it relates to people today, but I don't know, that's a really good way to put that.
And it also makes sense that some of us retain that hunter gene. Like there's some people that believe that dyslexia, ADD are just a throwback to being the hunter. And what I mean by that, in a future podcast, we'll get into um, reframing all of the traits that are negative, and I've got a whole list of them. Like distractibility. Well, if you're a hunter, being distracted could save your life, can keep you from being eaten by a predator. So we'll get into that in another podcast. But I wanted to explain this convergent divergent thinking because it will start to make more sense. Anyway, this Liam went around the country and he didn't just do a little testing. He did this for over a year. So he had a huge, and I'll show you the book at another time, but a huge sample of these kids. And he came back and he went, you know what? I've got to devise a test to measure these creative kids. So he came up with this thing called the object creativity test. You may have heard of it, but anyway, it would be like this. How many uses can you think of for a brick, a simple brick? So I'll ask you, Rebecca, how many uses can you think of for a brick?
Probably like a weapon. You could build with it. You can kind of, I don't know, use it to weigh down a stack of papers. And I don't know, there's probably like lots of things you could do with a brick.
Okay,
probably crush it up and make like sandy, heavy brick, sandy stuff. You can make cement out of things like that too.
Keep going. This is great.
No.
This is what he meant.
That's just off the top of my head, but
no, you're perfect because this is totally unrehearsed. Now, let me tell. If I was reading this, I'll read what the kids that had the highest academic scores said uses for a brick. Make a bookcase, to build a building, to
bookcase would be cool.
As a weight for papers. End. Okay, and then the more creative, it would be like to grind up and make powder to kill somebody, to kill your teacher, to use it to start a riot, to break through the windows and start a revolution, it was like, oh my God.
Weigh down a suitcase so when you go to the airport, you ruin somebody's day.
It was like that. It was totally off the scale. And he would literally go on page after page of the creative types would come up with this. And always the science mind had about 3, maybe 4, and that would be it. And they couldn't think of anything else uses for a brick. They couldn't think outside, the old saying, outside the box. They're in a box. And so he wrote about this, and he wrote about how the universities keep the most creative kids out because they only look at the high academic scores to get in. So you're going to find Cambridge and Princeton and Harvard, or these are all what I call farmer thinkers, or we could say convergent thinkers. Yeah. He has this great explanation of convergent and divergent thinking, and it was, you converge to a single correct answer. Well, what is the SAT questionnaires, the question to get admitted to a university? They're all one correct answer. Even multiple choice is you choose one correct answer, right?
And written answers are the bane of a creative person's existence because there's infinite possibilities, just the different ways you could rearrange those words.
You are the perfect dyslexic.
I took an online class where some of the questions on the test were written answers and the computer was creating it. So if you didn't have it word for word exactly how the computer would say it, if it's Stacy would go to the what blank, the mall. No, mall.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Mind numbing. But I love that because they totally do gatekeep schools for like when you said like more farmer breed. I can't remember divergent and convergent or convergent thinkers.
Convergent, you converge to a single correct answer, and that's what the farmer mind or the convergent mind, scientific mind, converges to a correct answer. But what about in the world today? Is there a correct answer for race or politics
No.
or schools or
Yeah,
anything in
it
life.
doesn't work like that in the real world.
No, in the
And
real world,
right after our podcast, my dad told me this really cool story where, up until a certain point, he was valedictorian in regular university, but when he went to medical school, it was this other guy, and he was a total farmer brain, top of the class, could remember everything, like word for word, could parakeet the entire textbook to you, basically. But his first day on call in the hospital, he said he had a great day and he checked everybody out. And my dad told me that this other guy came in and looked at all of his patients, and he asked the guy before he left, "Are you sure everybody's okay?" And he's like, "Yeah, they're fine. There's a woman dead, dead. She's been lying there dead for hours, and he never thought to check her because the machines didn't go off. So of course she's fine."
oh my
And then
God.
the same guy keeps having. He got an award for being top medical student, like an award that you give at all the medical school, right? Like, this is the best guy, the star student. He had two breakdowns, and my dad had to cover his shift. And
By the way, her dad is also a
yeah,
little bit, isn't he a little bit dyslexic or
he's I don't
kind of?
know. He's
It's all on a continuum.
brilliant.
It's a
He's brilliant.
continuum.
He's somewhere on the spectrum,
Yeah.
but he's totally more built for the physical environment because he wasn't having mental breakdowns. And this guy couldn't handle it. He couldn't handle he was the top of his class, could remember everything from everywhere, like best grades, but he couldn't handle being in that environment and actually having that sort of pressure on him. Like, he panicked. Like
Yeah.
that story you told me where,
In the army, in the war,
yeah, where that guy just freaked out.
he freaked out
Like,
because he was his brain was overloaded with fear. I mean, the fear
yeah,
had literally sent him into a stupid trance
yeah.
where he couldn't,
He just
like this guy.
shot everybody. It's like, it's, I think how we measure intelligence and how we think of university is wrong because there's different kinds of being intelligent, and I don't think being a parakeet and being able to
Mhm.
repeat everything like an encyclopedia is necessarily an intelligent thing if you can't use any of it at any capacity, you know.
Well, this is what Liam had basically said what you're saying, and Dr. Hudson, I should say, and he added credibility because he wrote this book, but it's an obscure book. You won't find another book like it, and why is that?
Because the rest of the sciencey world is kind of
They're like that
farmer
guy that left
brain.
woman dead, that walked
Yeah,
past the dead body.
we're
Um,
fine. Everybody's fine. All the patients.
now, here's what happens. Um, I wish I could quote this perfectly, but I can't. The convergent thinker uses all of the processes and the steps to get to the correct answer. And if any of those steps aren't right, it's I forget how he said it, but it was really. I'll find the exact quote next time.
It's like the road less traveled versus the taking the path that you already know, you know.
And here's what happens when I call it when they need us. Usually, it'll be at times like these, or say in war. And there was a J.P. Gilbert, who was director of psychological research in 1942 to 1946, and he was the chief researcher for the U.S. Army's Air Force. And I think I told you, when that World War II had started, not that I was alive, but what I heard, when World War II started, you had the
Our
Luftwaffe,
conspiracy
Germany,
podcast could be our next thing.
yeah, and you had the Japanese who invented dogfighting, and they'd been in war for 6 years before we even entered. And, we're coming with these rickety old biplanes that we had to like hurry and make new planes. And then we had to also teach pilots how to fly. Well, what the Army Air Corps found out real quickly was their best pilots were flunking out. And it wasn't because of the flying. It was the officers test, the OCS test, which I so proudly also didn't pass or didn't get high enough grade.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. That's officers candidate school, by the way.
Oh,
Well,
God.
what he discovered was that when he discovered that, he also used the term convergent divergent. And here's where I'll give you an example of the war I was in, which was the Vietnam War. When they first started flying the B-52 bombers over North Vietnam, they would fly in at the same altitude and come back on the same course. Now, why they did that was because economics. It was less fuel. They fly the same course in and out, and they were getting shot down all the time.
Yeah.
That's called convergent flying, right? Which doesn't work in war. The divergent thinker, the hunter thinker, he's never in the same place. That's what's called dogfighting. And so
you can't hit that plane that's not just flying in a line.
Great, exactly. Well, I don't know if you saw the movie Top Gun, Maverick, in Top Gun. He's got a great line when the girl who's the scientist asked him, what, this is when he did this inverted loop and all this kind of stuff against the Russian planes. And she goes, what were you thinking? And he goes, when you're up there, you're not thinking, you don't think.
Oh my God, that's perfect.
That's the divergent thinker.
Yeah.
And unless you and I are
they're also the full hands-on learners, like the kids that can't sit in class and just listen and go.
Yep. So this is a big topic, and guess what? Not discussed. Not discussed. Yeah. It's not discussed because it doesn't have value in a convergent thinking world.
Yeah.
And here's an example.
And the world's pretty much like 65, like 70% convergent thinkers. So why?
Well, it's 99.9 convergent thinkers at the top.
Oh,
people that are running everything. An example is, let's look at code for a computer. It's zeros and ones. And I'm not going to go into how you set that up, but I took a computer science course and found out, well, I know how to do code. I don't want to do code. It's boring. It's like, remember what I gave you my definition of a farmer is somebody who can sit and pick bugs off the leaves all day long? That's code. That's a computer programmer. Zeros and ones, and you can make a whole language out of it. And I get it in a second when I saw it. That's convergent thinking until something goes wrong. And I'll tell you what went wrong at the year 2000. You were, what year were you born?
1996. I'm 24.
So you were around. You don't know this, but the year 2000, we had a grave problem. When they made the computer, they had it on a clock. And I mean, the clock inside the computer, which ran everything, ended up at the year 2000. And they didn't know if all of the computers would fail. We would lose all of this information. It was a big deal.
That is so weird.
But whoever invented it didn't think about we would go past the year 2000. It went to 1999, and then
nobody would like computers.
Huh?
And nobody would like computers in the future.
And actually, what they did was they gathered up a group of farmers mostly from India. This is how we had so many Indian scientists come to this country. When they were literally in every corporation in America reconfiguring the computer so they wouldn't lose their data, because they didn't know what would happen when the year turned over to 2000, because it literally was like, to the computer, like ditto, nothing. Anyway, so let's back to this JP Guilford. He also came up with, there's more ways to measure thinking. And he came up with, he had to come up with something because they weren't graduating enough pilots, right? Well, they came up with the warrant officer program. And none of this stuff is like, you can check the dates and you'll find out that my dates are right when things started, but I don't have scientific evidence for all of this,
Yeah.
But I'm just telling you what I found in my research.
ADHD, dyslexic people don't usually remember.
We don't care about it.
Exactly, yeah.
But here's what I found. The greatest fighter pilot of all time is, if you watch the movie The Right Stuff, the guy that had the right stuff.
I don't think I watched that movie. I've seen Top Gun, but
it's now my mind's gone blank. I'll think of his name in a second. I can see his face and everything, and he retired as a general in the Air Force. But
Remembering in pictures, also
Uh-huh.
very remembering in pictures, also very ADHD, dyslexic kind of thing.
Why can't I please remember his name? Oh my God, I'll beat myself up because I can't think of it. Anyway, what had happened was what I did was I checked the dates of um, when this guy became a pilot. It's going to ruin my whole story because I can't think of his name.
That's okay.
Oh my God,
Pretend just general guy or whatever.
this guy.
Yeah.
Anyway, what I found was he was a mechanic and he could take apart, the engines on those planes in a second. Well, he became like a sergeant officer, which was a warrant officer, and he was able to become a pilot. And he ended up being a World War II ace, a Korean ace, and even I guess it was in. I don't think he made it into the Vietnam War, but the guy was like the best. All pilots would know his name and everything of it.
Yeah.
But
Famous guy.
anyway, I checked and I saw, oh yeah, he was 19 years old. He flunked the aptitude test, and so he had to become a mechanic. By the way, we're going to get outside noise.
It's okay. It's okay.
It's not okay.
It's kind of quiet. I don't really hear it all that much.
So what we're going to do is we're going to cut away from this. Or can you pause it while I go find the guy's name? Because it's driving me crazy.
Yeah, I can pause it.
You pause it. Sort of wrap it up because the guy's name was Chuck Yeager.
End of intermission, guys. Okay, go.
Chuck Yeager.
Yeah.
Like every pilot will tell you he is the best fighter pilot of all time. He started off as a sergeant, fixing fixing engines and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it fits in perfect with Gilbert's taking over that unit. And then of course we got better pilot, we got the right pilots because we need farmer pilot. The farmer pilots fly the commercial airlines. I mean, there's hunters obviously and everything, but those are the guys that are the bread and butter like that. Then you got the guys that are outside the limit. They're the Chuck Yeagers of the world that are like fighter pilots,
like the guys who want to dog fighters kind of thing.
Dog fighters, Army Rangers, Special Forces, the list goes on, deep sea divers. What is the one common link? See if I'm going to test you, if you can remember the common link between all of these people that have the hunter brain. What's the common link?
They're all divergent thinkers.
Yes.
Yeah. And I told you, open answer questions are good.
Okay.
There's a million answers.
They need dopamine. They're dopamine deficient.
Oh yeah, we went into that.
So what would a fighter pilot get when he's, going 2,000 miles an hour upside down, with somebody shooting at him? You're talking about massive, massive loads of dopamine.
And you have to be able to handle that.
He can handle it. He can
break
think
like
clearly.
what's his face or like the guy in the ER.
Yeah, there's stories of. There's one story of a commercial airline that was flying across the Atlantic, got into trouble, and was calling a mayday and was about to crash. And Chuck Yeager happened to be flying, his Air Force plane out there at the time or something, and told the guy how to reset this. It had never been in that plane, by the way, but told him how to reset everything and pull it out and literally save that plane. There's stories like that. That's how good this guy is.
Oh my God. And he flunked. He was an idiot in the government's eyes, according to their test.
Yeah, he would have never
made
it.
Into school.
He'd have been a dog sergeant like I was in the Army, just some guy repairing planes. But thank goodness to J.P. Gilbert, who also went on to UCLA, I guess it was UCLA or UCLA, and wrote books about multiple intelligence. He said there's way than one more type of intelligence. You don't always hear these things because it's people like you and I that would be motivated by it. The farmer isn't going to be motivated by these conversations. They're going to think we're full of BS.
We're picking on them. We're being kind of
we're
calling everybody farmers without context.
We've been picked on our entire life. I mean, I'm still, very few days go by when I don't feel the shaming of a farmer's comment about something that I've either said or doing or whatever.
We're the stupid fidgety kids that can't like keep pay attention for longer than like 15 minutes on something.
And what we're going to do, so hopefully people will come back to this, is the next podcast, we're going to talk about those traits. And I'm going to give you a whole list of the opposite. I spent months on this to do this, by the way. And so I'll end with one really cool story that happened to me.
And then I also want to make a point too.
Why don't you talk? You make your point.
Oh, okay.
Because this guy's running his air blower out. You can't hear him.
It might be kind of like a spicy topic. I don't want to offend anybody, but you were talking about how a lot of our scientists back in the 2000s came from India. And I think that's really interesting because I watch a lot of this guy's podcast called Kit Boga. And they're more like streams, but he's scamming the scammers. And there's a lot of scam calls obviously come from India. And I always thought that was a really interesting way to try to rob people of their money, because you wouldn't think. I know it takes a really creative person to think, I'm gonna call somebody and pretend to be a prince from Nigeria and like try to get your credit card information to send you yada yada yada. Like a lot of people are copying it now, and I feel like the people copying it, they're obviously bad people. I'm not condoning that behavior, but I just think, you ever thought of doing that sort of scam?
You don't have those kinds of thoughts. By the way, I could get into a whole thing about integrity in the farmer mindset. Not saying there's not a lot of criminal farmers, but an example of a farmer university is Harvard. Harvard produces some of the greatest minds, blah, 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 blah. It also creates some of the greatest criminal minds. Bernie Madoff, who, single-handedly Ponzi schemed, the whole Wall Street, for billions of dollars. It's that kind of, farmer thinking that can also be criminal too, so there's probably just it. But here's the thing, they don't end up in jail usually. Bernie got caught, but a lot of these criminal farmers never get caught because they are pretty smart and they figured out the system. So, and that's one of the things that you hear a lot of the uprising today is, look at how I want to say, captivated. We've put in prison almost a whole culture of black young, or not just young, but black men in prison, and women that they represent a higher percentage than white inmates. And it's not because they're black, it's probably because they're ADD and dyslexic. They got the hunter brain. The hunter brain also is not very good at it's a very addictive brain. It needs dopamine. So if you don't give this black child like some creative thing to do, he's gonna go with the drugs. What do drugs do? Drugs, sex, creative, all create dopamine. And so does robbing a liquor store. You want to get a hit of dopamine? Go out, rob a liquor store, and you will be, not that I've ever done that, of course, but those kinds of things create dopamine. A farmer's not going to rob a liquor store. He's too afraid. It would create so much dopamine, the guy would stand there and drop his gun, So you're not going to find the farmer robbing the liquor store. You'll find the farmer robbing Wall Street for millions of dollars, or a farmer that's the head of a major corporation that takes out all of the profits that the company's made to pay themselves. You could look at what's happened in the last 50 years in terms of wages. Wages for people working have gone up, a little bit. Wages for CEOs, people at the top, have gone up thousands of percent. It's not unheard of to hear somebody, and I can get the names of these companies are easy to look up, but that makes hundreds of millions of dollars, and yet they have a hard time paying their employees minimum wage. Isn't that wrong?
It's like, why do they need the extra little squeeze on the people below you. You don't
That's
would paying everybody like $2 more even make a difference, but it's like
See, hunters don't end up managing or the CEO of major corporations. Usually they start the company. Hunters start it and then they get bored. I can't tell you how many companies I've started and I get bored. I left Wall Street when I had one of my best years ever back in the 70s. I was making $40,000 a month and I got bored. Well, it wasn't so much that I got bored. I had no support about what I was doing. The farmer um, boss, or he was the regional manager. He told me he he asked me if I was just a flash in the pan because he couldn't understand how I could start and build a business so big so quickly, and he basically was on me to make more, and it just made it uncomfortable when I quit. I just like, this is not fun. If it's not fun, it's not creating dopamine. If it doesn't create dopamine, I'm not going to do it. So I've had the years of experience to find out how to run my own brain. And that's what we want this podcast to leave people with, tools to help run your own brain.
Yeah.
So in summary, the first one we covered the idea of the hunter thinking and farmer thinking, which has nothing to do with farming.
Yeah.
And divergent and convergent thinking, which also farmers are convergent thinkers, hunters are divergent thinkers. And this is why when, like you said, when you go to take a multiple choice test, it could be any one of those. And yet the convergent,
you could think of a creative way to make it any answer, honestly.
Yeah.
I mean, for a lot of them, not for all of them, but for,
So that's kind of my summary of what we did. And then next time we'll talk about this list of traits that I'll prove to you. Everything that we're going to do, we're going to prove to you in a logical way. It's not like you have to go look it up. We're going to make it so that in your mind, you'll go like, that makes complete sense because it's happened to me, or it's happened to us.
Yeah. And that's the way ADHD, dyslexic people think,
Yeah.
And
so anything you want to end with?
No. Other than that, I think because of all your experiences and stuff, I think that's an invaluable perspective. Especially like, I kind of feel like I'm also in the audience perspective where I'm like somebody just starting out trying to get into all this stuff. And
this is how it started. This is how we came up with this idea. I've been coaching you about your writing and things like that. And I can't help it when I talk about this, that those terms come up. And then we just thought, wow, if you're having struggles with it, and I had struggles with it, everybody is, because even though teachers know that somebody is, they don't understand dyslexia, but they know about it. The way that the school system is set up is you get money by having the highest rankings, and you get rankings by having the highest scores. Well, if you've got special ed kids or special kids with needs, that's going to lower your scores. So they're not really interested in that. That's just the bottom line. It's the parents have to go out and find coaches and find, because
tutors
and unfortunately they don't, unless they watch our dogcast, unless they listen, read about it, they're going to think their kid's dumb or there's something wrong with him. And yet,
I mean, I definitely did when I was a kid. I thought I was stupid because I'm in the special ed class, and
I want to get some people like Steven Spielberg that are major, people that have just discovered that they're dyslexic. They've known their whole life, but they've sort of come out of the closet. We call it the
we'd all be too lucky to get them on the podcast.
Yeah, well, think about all these creative, there's a school they call MIT the dyslexic school, because there's so many there's a whole, like, it's like once one has made it in, they tell the other guys how to get in, and so they've got there's a kind of a room, was it like a tagline that, if you're a smart dyslexic, MIT is where you want to go. And that sounds like, when I was a kid, oh my God, MIT is up here and I'm dog shit down here on the bottom. But if you saw the, it would be great if we could interview, we want to do interviews of
Yeah.
people like the Spielbergs and people like
Yeah.
MIT students that are dyslexic and ask them,
Yeah.
how
But
do they
also like small time people. I want to get like a bunch of, I don't know, just like creative minds that are like getting into things. And I know your daughter is one of them, and I really wanted to get my fiance on here because
well,
he's not trying to do anything big, but we met in our special ed class because he's ADD,
oh my gosh, that's
So
perfect. We met.
yeah,
What a great title for a book. We met in special ed. I'm
yeah,
serious. That's
yeah.
like
In Bart class, it's great. But he's brilliant. He's brilliant, not according to the farmer way, but he's our DM of our DMD group, which means
Mhm.
he does all the special voices and all makes all the stories, and he's probably sitting behind this screen right now making a whole big map for our whatever worlds. But it's like if a farmer was gonna play D&D, they buy the pre-made book and they buy the whatever and they tell you.
Okay, I don't know what you're talking about. Remember, I'm
Yeah.
older. The
Oh,
DN
Dungeons and Dragons?
oh, Dungeon and Dragons.
Yeah. But
Sorry.
Dungeons and Dragons comes with a pre-made story pamphlet
Mhm.
that you just go and you do whatever. But like he was inspired by Matt Mercer, and so he makes his whole own little world and he does all these weird voices and shit you wouldn't think of him
Hunter,
doing.
Hunter,
Yeah.
Hunter brain.
It's like people with thinking like that, it just I don't know. We need a ton of people like that just all the
Yeah,
time,
we
bringing them
will.
on and
We will.
interrogate all the questions out
Yeah,
of
we'll
them, so
interrogate
it'll
them. We'll make them tell us.
entertain everybody.
In the future, we're also going to talk about one of my favorite subjects, which people do not want to talk about, and there's nothing in our culture written about it too much. There's a few things. John Bradshaw wrote about shame. Shame is one of the things that will stop hunters in their tracks, stop anybody in their tracks.
Yeah.
And you get made fun of enough in school, you get put back in the third grade. All of these create shame, shame, shame. And one of the things that shame is called the master emotion. Shame is the self judging the self. I am stupid. Well, if I'm stupid, I don't have much confidence. If I have no confidence, I'm not going to try anything.
Yeah.
I'll go rob a
Why
liquor
try
store.
if you'll fail because you're stupid?
I
All
might as well
the
just go rob a
tests
liquor
say
store.
that you can't do anything.
Yeah. So that's a subject. Again, we'll talk about that in future times. We'll try to take little pieces of it so it won't we won't jam it all down somebody's throat. But this is, for me, this is 40 years of research. I've literally, in order to survive,
Invaluable.
I've had to. I mean, I have written all in like 50 books and screenplays and maybe 1,000 magazine articles, all published. Well, they're not published because they were like the most perfectly written. They were published because I have a game plan for how to get them published. I'm not afraid, you know, to say, here, here's
Yeah.
something, here's an idea, and the reason why people have difficulty, see, it's a catch-22. If you're creative and smart, you can think up all these ideas, but guess who are the publishers and the editors? Farmer thinkers.
Yeah.
The farmers. And I love them. They're great people. We need them to correct our spelling and make sure that, the I's are crossed, dotted, whatever. I cross my I's, dot my
Yeah.
T's.
It's better that way, honestly. They just
One time I had this was the son of one of my editors. At one time I had 5 editors working for me almost round the clock because I was averaging. I only started writing late in life. I didn't even know I could be a writer. It was like 43 or 44, something like that. And I wrote my first book, but I would have these editors. I was doing like, um, I was averaging 3 to 5 books a year for a long, to get to 50 books. I mean, and they were 300-page books, and I'd have to write them 2 or 3 times because I'm dyslexic, they missed, and if you read my longhand, you'd go like, oh my God. So I had to devise all kinds of ways to get my words down, and I had to have help from my farmer crew that would help me. you know. But that'll be another topic for another
Yeah.
time.
Also, I want to talk about, because I love what you were saying before, that we're like dopamine addicts, right?
Hmm.
And I think what really holds creative people back and hunter brains back is when there's not something dopamine related in what you're doing. And I feel like, because you've been in a funk right now with your writing, like, and I've been in a funk for like,
Well, it's also the
yeah,
pandemic causes the
yeah. But I also feel like, I don't know, if you want to do something like almost like if you want to write like a hunter brain, and but writing's kind of a farmer activity in itself, but
Mhm.
not at the same time. I want to talk about like finding the dopamine in that, and
Yeah,
like
we will.
how to get people excited for
Well,
those
here's one of
things.
the dangers, and here's one of the things you'll find: almost all writers are addicted to cigarettes. Cigarettes create dopamine. I mean, the cigarettes don't create dopamine. Nicotine creates dopamine.
Yeah.
So you won't find a lot of writers are smoking weed. That's not that's not a real function of the hunter brain. Now there's hunters that'll smoke weed because they get too many ideas and it calms them down. So they do that for a different reason. But but the
Like
but
if you
the
don't want
hunt,
to do anything all day.
yeah, but the hunter brain wants stimulation, and that's what you meant by dopamine. So we'll also hopefully find out some ways to find your own patch of dopamine and how to keep it coming in without taking drugs or anything like that.
Also, like not letting shame scare you off from things
Yeah,
too.
here's what
That'd be fun
dopamine.
topics.
I'm sorry, I keep interrupting, but
No, I keep interrupting you too. Don't feel bad.
okay.
That's part of
So
being ADHD, everybody, is you interrupt all the time. You can't
yeah,
help yourself. It's hilarious and sad.
it's
You'll
hilarious.
have no friends.
Here's when I'd have these glimpses. I knew nothing about this stuff that we're talking about growing up, nothing at all. And I was in the army, and I remember I was I was in the paratroopers. I joined the paratroopers. You jump out of airplanes, right? And we're
That's fun.
flying up and flying, and I am completely scared to death. I'm scared of heights, and my thoughts are all inward. But as I'm going up, it's. I mean, you talk about dopamine, thinking about what you're going to do, but it was like very scary. And I got to the door, and I was one. They call it a stick. So there's 12 guys in a stick or whatever, and I was one of the first ones to jump out of the plane. And I stood in that door, and there's been episodes where jump masters have had to kick the guy out the door. That's the farmer. They had to kick him out because he's literally
Yeah.
paralyzed in fear.
Does he drop
I,
to his death?
I,
What happens
huh?
to those? What happens to those guys? You gotta
Well,
kick out the door.
they've got a static line and it automatically opens, so it doesn't matter.
Oh,
But
okay, good.
I jumped out, and I noticed at the minute that I jumped out, my world changed. My thinking became absolutely crystal clear. Because what happens in the paratroopers, if you jump out and you have a malfunction of your parachute, you've got to get rid of your main chute and go to your reserve chute. There's a lot of, and you're thinking all the time, going, will I remember to pull my cord? Will I remember to do this? Where will I remember to, am I going to screw up? Am I going to spin? Am I going to, what? All this stuff's going on. As soon as I was out in the air, and later on, when I did sports jumping, where you go up and not in the military, but just you go out skydiving is what it's called. I would go out and hang on the strut of the plane and laugh, and it was just like I could care less. Oh, this is like so fun, and I would like float with one hand, and I would just like wave
Oh
bye
my
bye,
god.
see you later, and float down. That was my. No, I can't do that every day. But
Yeah.
when I want like a massive load of dopamine, and then you're excited, and then you're motivated, you come back, and blah, 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 blah. And that's one of my best examples of being on full on dopamine high.
Yeah. Oh my god. I can't. So did it completely remove your fear of heights?
No, I'm still.
No,
If
really?
I go up on a building and I get nervous,
I'm absolutely terrified of high places. I will. My
you
legs
can't.
will just not keep going,
I
and I'll
probably
be
should
like,
say
oh, all right.
I probably shouldn't say I have a fear of heights because it was an Army Ranger. I mean, I had to jump out of
Yeah.
helicopters and I had to
Yeah.
climb. But I think of heights like going to the moon, like.
Oh, yeah, that's high.
That's a high height.
Yeah, that's a high
Then
height.
I'd be a little bit nervous, but I'd still
Yeah.
do it.
You'd probably
Anyway.
jump it out, honestly, with parachute from here to the moon. Fine.
Yeah, you would pretty much die.
Nah. What is burning up in the re-entering the atmosphere? That's just...
I don't know. I shouldn't discount that. I mean, I think the highest that anybody's ever jumped is like 60,000 feet. Yeah, they have oxygen on and all that, but who knows? Maybe someday they'll parachute from the moon. Who knows?
Mm.
Anyway, we need to wrap this up because we're going to start boring people with this stuff, and we want them to
don't worry too much though. A lot of podcasts are very, very long.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, this one, I want this to be jam-packed with helpful hints. So here's the helpful hint. Look for things in your environment that create dopamine, that aren't painful.
Yeah. Hopefully not jumping out of a plane, a little dangerous.
Oh, that's okay. That creates dopamine.
Okay, yeah.
It.
Audience, jump out of a plane. You're in a rut?
Actually, yeah, if you're in a rut, you want to get out of a rut, jump out of a plane. And I'm telling you, the rut ends right now.
With a parachute or without a parachute?
No, with a parachute. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Now they do the sissy thing where they have a tandem thing, but I guess it's okay. But
a sissy thing.
Some guys on your back. I mean, that's like baby.
Babies have a guy on their back to help them with their parachute.
Yeah. So anyway, look for ways that create dopamine in your environment, and think about things in your life that have created dopamine and when you were most successful. That's a great takeaway.
Yeah. Also, when you finally get out of a plane and your brain just shuts off and you know what to do, that's another helpful tip. Just let your brain kind of shut off and do what you're gonna do. Your hunter brain, that's how you work.
When you jump out of a plane, your brain doesn't shut off.
I mean like you're not thinking about. I don't mean that. Like you're not thinking about like
yourself, about your life,
about the height, about the whatever. Like let yourself go to that other mindset, not like and not
try to block it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
I wanted to go into and explain the whole psychology, which we did last time, about what happens in the brain when it gets the dopamine. It allows the prefrontal cortex to think in a classical sense. One of the reasons why, especially a lot of boys, when they have to take a test that's called important, like a test to get into college, or a test to graduate, or the midterm or final, their brain will shut down. Like my brain used to shut down, and I'd be reading the same question over and over again. My brain was working perfectly correct for the hunter brain. It had shut down and gone into the flight or fight, which is not in the prefrontal cortex. It's below. It's that part of the brain that's below it. The thymus, I guess it is what it's called. Well, there's no memory there. So how could I remember my test questions? What that goes into flight or fight is all the blood rushes from your brain, which has a lot of blood in it when you're thinking, to the extremities so you can run. In other words, if I say that this test is the most important test I've ever taken, it's also saying there's a saber-toothed tiger over there coming at me. Danger, danger.
You're going to have to go touch it. Yeah. You're going to have to go interact with that.
Yeah. I've coded and a lot of kids do, test taking with danger, fight or flight, boom. Not till I understood that was I able. Now I take a test and I relax. I've things that I do to relax so that I don't slip into that fight or flight syndrome. Anyway, enough of that. Let's end this right now.
Oh yeah, we keep saying that, but that's also part of the dog cast. ADHD all over the place.
No, we can't end.
We can't end it. Yeah, we'll just keep going on and on and on.
It'll be like the next day, and we'll still be dog casting. Oh my god.
Where does these? Oh wait, I'll ask you afterwards. It's gonna.
Frozen Spring.
So let's. Yeah. Bye everybody.
Bye everybody.
You're excused, 'cause you're always late, overweight, and totally rude, honey.